Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, August 11th, 2023, and today we're going to be talking about Ron DeSantis now firing his campaign manager, pushing her out from this position, taking in his current chief of staff from the governor's office, now in this campaign manager spot. The third major shakeup of the DeSantis campaign, with just months to the name of the campaign, with him recently actually laying off a third of his entire campaign staff, really goes to show where the state of the DeSantis campaign is today and what we can expect from it in the near future. Ron DeSantis, once supposedly the Titan Slayer, the person who was going to take down Donald Trump, is now failing to capture a significant portion of the Republican vote as he continues to decrease and decrease as we look at the present day polling data. In fact, today, Ron DeSantis reached the lowest point of the entire time he has ever been valued in terms of overall polling. From the moment that he was included in 2024 GOP nomination polls back in July of 2021, as far back as the Real Clear Politics average and aggregate of polling actually goes down to, Ron DeSantis was at a higher point then than he is today. He started off at 17.5%, peaked around 31% nationwide, and today is now at 15.1% to Donald Trump's 54.2%. Donald Trump is on the verge of a 40-point advantage from what was just a 12-point advantage at a different period of time. It gets worse when you look at FiveThirtyEight, which I wish I had pulled up to show you, but I'm just going to tell you where it was. Ron DeSantis was just 2 points behind Donald Trump, and now today stands 40 points behind Donald Trump on the FiveThirtyEight average. And with this move to get rid of his campaign manager, push her out to a different position, essentially firing her. I mean, when you take someone who was your chief of staff, your campaign manager, your main right-hand man, in this case woman, and put them in this advisory position, you're essentially firing them without breaking that tie, burning that bridge. And that's exactly what's happened here with the DeSantis campaign. For a while now, a lot of people have been talking about, with the recent stack of shakeups, whether or not the campaign manager was going to go. In nearly every single instance of you having these campaign officials either publicly on the record or granted anonymity to talk about the campaigns behind the scenes, in every case, they have said that the campaign manager was going to stay, that DeSantis was loyal to her, that he was going to keep her in this case. And that's the thing. That didn't happen. It's a complete shakeup from what we are expecting, which means there isn't this heavy level of internal communication, but rather a lot of these decisions probably are happening at the very top. DeSantis is probably seeing where the polling numbers are. He has a phone. He has the news at his disposal. He knows where he is nationwide. And that's the exact reason why you've seen this entire shakeup, even though he announced just, quite frankly, 1 to 2 months ago. I mean, we are talking about a campaign that hasn't been in the race for quite some time, and yet for some reason, Ron DeSantis needs all of these shakeups, he needs all of these firings, he needs a new campaign manager, and it's only going to get worse. What we have seen thus far is Ron DeSantis is near total and complete collapse nationwide, but it's also happening on a statewide level. In Iowa, Ron DeSantis is at just 17% from what was a lot higher when we saw the polls back in April and May. 7 points behind Trump at one of the mainstream polls that was taken in April of 2023. 37 to 30. Then came another poll that showed him down 18 points, another one showing him down 15 points. But today we start to see the average beginning to increase, beginning to get a lot better. And what we also know is that while there isn't much data in Iowa, that national number tells us that given where he is right now, he's still outrunning his national numbers, or at least the national margin, by roughly 10 points. When he was down 10 against Trump, there were polls in Iowa that showed him head-to-head. There were polls nationwide that said in a two-way race, DeSantis would beat Donald Trump in the GOP primary. And to see how far he has fallen down, now to a point of having to redo his entire campaign. I mean, quite frankly, from ground up and from top down, you are seeing the staffers going, the campaign manager going, the candidate changing, style of campaigning. Everyone is going under this revamp because they see themselves decreasing, dipping and dipping and dipping. And it is continuing because either the revamp hasn't fully happened yet, has yet to kick in, or Ron DeSantis just isn't as electable as he originally let out to be. It isn't just Iowa that is leading this effort. It is also New Hampshire, notably New Hampshire, that we saw this state being what used to be Ron DeSantis' strongest possibility at winning a primary in the first big four: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of Nevada polling, but I'll show you South Carolina in just a moment. But we can see that at different periods of time, in fact, the same pollster that polled roughly the same group of people from January 2023 showed Ron DeSantis with a 12-point lead over Donald Trump. 3 months later, they showed Donald Trump with a 20-point lead over Ron DeSantis, a 32-point swing that is on average the rough swing that we have seen amongst many other pollsters. And like I said, I'll show you South Carolina because it is also equally interesting. Because Donald Trump started out in January, and this is one of his biggest states. He won this in 2016. He lost in Iowa, won in New Hampshire, then won in South Carolina for a winner-take-all state here, but he did well. It was supposed to be Jeb Bush's state, so he did very well in South Carolina. It's very clear that they like him, and yet he was up just 15 points back in January. Today, in the most recent Fox Business poll, is up 34, and on average up 26%. In every single case, he has increased, and DeSantis has decreased. And I've told you this. I mean, this has been the narrative. This has been what we have been seeing for quite some time now. This isn't news to you, or at least it shouldn't be. But it is still fascinating, especially now that we get more campaign information. I'm starting to see a comparison that might align him more with a failed candidate from 2016 than anyone that could perceive him as potentially, again, this Titan Slayer, as someone who could actually defeat Donald Trump. I see him as the similar style of candidate as Ben Carson, who went on to serve in the Trump administration, but started off not too hot when it came down to preliminary polling. 2013 polling, 2014 polling had a lot of these candidates that ended up fizzling out very early on in much better positions than Dr. Ben Carson. But as we got through the primary season, and arguably were at a different point in time, Ron DeSantis and Ben Carson had a very similar rise, seen as this alternative, seen as this calm manner compared to President Trump, seen as someone who could actually take on Donald Trump until he couldn't, until you started to see a complete collapse of the campaign. Because while Donald Trump did maintain an advantage over every other Republican, there was only one candidate who actually came within striking distance and actually led him for about a singular day, and that was Dr. Ben Carson. November 5th, 2015 was the one day in time that Donald Trump did not lead nationally. And this momentum wasn't guided by primary victories or strong debate performances. Ben Carson was just coming across as a more likable, more electable candidate. But I do think that the more voters got to see him, juxtaposed with President Trump, he came off as weak. He wouldn't attack Donald Trump. Donald Trump, or at least others too, realized that he would be an easy target. It also didn't help that he didn't have the enthusiasm behind the campaign. The idea of him as a calm-mannered mainstream Republican was more palatable than what he actually was. Very similar to Ron DeSantis. Again, the one candidate in 2016 who actually was considered a strong possibility at taking out Donald Trump fizzled out very quickly. Because the one thing the Trump campaign does do very well is recognize where there is a threat and proceeds to nip that in the bud. It's what they did with Jeb Bush. When everyone was saying it's going to be Bush and Clinton again, except a different Bush, a different Clinton, Donald Trump went full force against Jeb Bush. Again, juxtaposed with someone who was lackluster, unenthusiastic, failing to capture any energy in the race, you saw Donald Trump excel amongst the Republican electorate. Ben Carson in a similar way. Now, Donald Trump wasn't nearly as hard on Ben Carson as he was Jeb Bush, but he certainly wasn't friendly. Donald Trump, though he did put him in the administration, that isn't to say that there wasn't still a lot of internal infighting within the GOP. There's a reason Ben Carson fell off so strongly, and it was very difficult to see how Ben Carson was going to be able to recover. And eventually, before you saw any of the real primaries start to fizzle out into a three-way race, a four-way race, Ben Carson dropped out of the race, going from being that one candidate who could do it at his peak, defeating Donald Trump, dipping quite dramatically to a point where he had to exit the race and he was no longer as of relevance. However, I think this time around with Ron DeSantis, he's in a better position because there aren't any other Republicans that are similar to him that could go ahead and climb this ladder. Donald Trump is quite frankly maintaining this lead. And to be fair, Ron DeSantis isn't polling as high as Ben Carson because Donald Trump is polling even higher. Now, I do say too, that Ron DeSantis wasn't in the race when he was polling high. Ben Carson was. So it definitely took, Ben Carson building up that image on himself too. It's not a direct comparison, but it's the most resemblance that I've seen in any 2016 candidate for the rise and dramatic fall of Governor Ron DeSantis. And I think we will come to a point very early on in the primary season where Ron DeSantis might just say, screw it, and drop out of the presidential race. And should he do that, I can guarantee you many others have already dropped out, and you see a Donald Trump sweep. Because even if Ron DeSantis stays in the race, based on these forecasts here, Donald Trump still sweeps. There are maybe 2 states that in head-to-head matchups, Ron DeSantis leads Donald Trump in terms of statewide polling. That's the state of Wisconsin and the state of Tennessee. Because Ron DeSantis has made himself another image of Donald Trump, there isn't much of a difference between the two, and voters in the Republican Party, as we see nationally, are very loyal to the former president. And in this possibility, where Ron DeSantis may only win 2 states, he might pull himself out early so he has a future in 2028 in the Florida Senate race, back in the House, or potentially for president yet again as the, and I'm using air quotes here, you can't see me, the runner-up to the 2024 GOP nomination. But where we are today puts Ron DeSantis in such a bad position that I wouldn't be surprised that after Iowa, after New Hampshire specifically, that he decides to drop out because it becomes very difficult to see how he ends up winning. It's a very similar story to what was told in 2016, not only this comparison to Dr. Ben Carson, but also just in general, the way that the field didn't consolidate until when it mattered, and even then it didn't fully, and Donald Trump had built up enough of a lead in delegate count, in nationwide support, that it didn't matter, even if they had. All of these 15 to 20 candidates were very much never Trumpers. Donald Trump was only polling in the 20s and the 30s for a significant chunk of the campaign. Even when everybody had dropped out, he only ended up winning about 44% of the national vote. Even the majority of the Republican Party was not on the Trump train. Today they are, and that is a fundamental problem for the GOP that the combined vote can never overcome Donald Trump. Which means all of these candidates that are in this position, in this 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th place are going to drop out. Their support might go to Ron DeSantis, but it doesn't matter because Donald Trump already has that majority vote. There is nothing that they can do to overcome him as it stands today, even if they combined forces. Even the candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's polling in 3rd place nationwide, who very openly aligns more with President Trump and would endorse President Donald Trump in some warped reality that he decides to endorse Ron DeSantis, what does that bring him to? 21 instead of 15 to Donald Trump's 54. There is no defeating Donald Trump, and the closer that Ron DeSantis starts to genuinely see it, because we've already seen that he knows something is wrong, he's letting go his campaign staffers. The campaign manager, who supposedly saved from any and all campaign cuts, has now been cut. And you are also seeing that this collapse is very similar to a candidate that we saw back in 2016, and it is just so interesting to see because this major leadership change is indicative of a change that is wanted on the top level that simply isn't happening. Ron DeSantis's dip in the polls is continuing. There isn't a plateau. There isn't a maintenance of his support. He is losing it. Every single day that goes by, Ron DeSantis loses support. So I would not be shocked, and I cannot believe that I am saying this, but I think there is a real possibility, and back to that point, I would not be shocked if Ron DeSantis either dropped out before Iowa or shortly after, because he doesn't want to go down as this person who ended up with 10% support to Donald Trump's 75, because that shows, one, you're disloyal to the president. Voters aren't going to choose you in the future, and he's already starting to build that reputation. But also, he recognizes that there is no pathway to victory, so he won't run. It's crazy to me, though, that the governor who was able to win in Florida, a swing state, by 20 points in the last election, is now seen as less electable than the president who lost, someone who is less likable than the president who lost, someone who is less palatable to the GOP and the general election than somebody who just lost. But that's the way politics goes. Donald Trump's campaign got out there early. Ron DeSantis wasn't even running when he was at his peak, which tells you everything you need to go. No, many, many, many campaign missteps. A lot happening now, but a lot that preceded the campaign. Ones that will continue to haunt Ron DeSantis as he continues to ponder on the question, how did I lose? The answers are there. The answers are there for self-discovery, self-reflection. But I think when you look at where we are today, with Ron DeSantis getting rid of his campaign manager, pushing her to just an advisory role position, tells you the current state of the campaign is in a very, very bad position. And I wouldn't be shocked if months from now we started to see, again, the full collapse of the DeSantis campaign with a replacement from a lower tier Republican right now, or maybe he makes it through Iowa, makes it through New Hampshire, but ultimately fades into irrelevancy, and then it's a one-man race with Donald Trump facing off for a rematch against President Joe Biden. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Republican primary election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all later today.